Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures. I'm excited about today's episode with Cheryl Kemp. We cover not only her entrepreneurial journey, but we actually do some educating about ideating, validating, pivoting, growing, funding early stage companies. And so we dive into all of those topics and more. But first, quick note about one of our sponsors that makes the show possible. And in full disclosure, I am an operator investor in this company. And it's Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive customized coaching to where you are at in your stage in building your company, so that based on your business model and based on the vertical that you're going after, you can really identify how to increase operational efficiency with you and your team, even if you don't really have your idea fleshed out yet, or you don't have a team, or you don't have a product. So it's really helpful for the ideation all the way through the earliest stages of funding. That's how the product is set up right now. So again, that URL is startuprocket.com. So if you're listening to this show, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com, and there you'll see more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about today. And if you are watching, you can also listen by downloading the podcast by just searching for Ventures anywhere that you get your podcasts. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Cheryl Kemp. All right, Cheryl, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
It is an honor. I'm excited for this conversation. Would you mind starting by just sharing a little bit about who you are and kind of what you're up to?
Yeah, happy to. I'm Cheryl. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Indifit, and we're a business management platform for independent fitness instructors. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the origin story behind the business, which is a little bit of a crazy one. We did start during COVID, but before I went on this wild Indifit journey, my career background is actually mostly in the food delivery and digital ordering space. So I got the earliest start of my career in the restaurant world. And then all the way back in 2013, when food delivery was just starting to happen, I got really intrigued with the way that technology was shifting the restaurant industry. So I worked for a small startup called Order App that was in Baltimore. And we ultimately had a really awesome exit to Groupon, which brought me to Chicago, where I am today. And then most recently, I was at a company called Ritual, which was very focused on the way that people order food from restaurants in an office setting in your typical central business districts in large cities. So unfortunately, when so many people started working from home, it had a really big impact on Ritual's business. So I was laid off in April, but of course, now the incredible silver lining has been starting Indifit.
Right. So for you personally, did you always have the entrepreneurial spirit and drive as a kid, or was this something that came later in life?
I did. And, I think there's a couple of things that happened in my childhood that probably made me this way, so to speak. So through my childhood years, I moved around a ton. I had actually moved like 18 times by age 18. And it wasn't necessarily for any specific reason. It wasn't like I had a parent in the military or anything like that. We just moved around a lot. And so I think there was something about growing up that way and kind of always starting over and being very comfortable with like newness and sort of like comfortable with uncomfortability to in a way. So I think that probably had a big impact. And I do have a few of those like funny, zany entrepreneurial stories as a kid. A lot of them actually got me into trouble. And the one that's probably most noteworthy is one day at school. I was probably, I don't know, early elementary school, maybe first, second grade. We had a local former pro athlete come in and speak to us. And it was kind of one of those like, stay in school, don't do drugs, PSA coming from an athlete type thing. But we all ended up getting a signed photograph of this athlete. And so in my mind, I was like, I have this thing that's worth something, right? Like, how do I monetize this? So my dad managed apartment communities. And so I often in the hours in the afternoon after school would end up in his office with access to, copiers, files, all sorts of things. I made a bunch of copies of this signed photo of this pro athlete. And I proceeded to go door to door in my community trying to sell them. And the funny thing is, people actually bought them mostly because they were like, look at this adorable kid hustling. But like I mentioned, we lived in this apartment community that my dad was the manager of. And so word of my door to door hustling made it back to my father, and it wasn't pretty. But you got to admire the hustle, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, growing up, my older brothers, I thought they were going to be the entrepreneurs, but I do remember my friend and I, we lived in near Seattle over in where the naval base is. And so we drew actually pictures of aircraft carriers on just pieces of paper, and then went around the neighborhood selling them. And yeah, it's mostly the little kids hustling, and we'll definitely move the dollars for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think entrepreneurship is something that runs in our DNA for some of us.
So then, all right. So then, through school and coming into the career, even before you got into the food delivery world, sort of what skills were developing? What kind of work did you do that maybe sort of has helped inform what you're up to now?
Yeah. I was really just a workhorse at a super young age.
Mm.
So I started working in the restaurant industry in my teens. And, the very modest start that everybody typically has, right? Wiping tables, waiting tables. So I did that, even in my high school years and into college. But what was interesting was I kind of like climbed the ladder in that
Mm.
fast casual world. And so by the time I was a junior in college, I was a full time GM of a restaurant. And so it made for a very interesting college experience because I worked 40 to 50 hours a week and sort of fit school in around it. But I think that was just always my nature. Like I wanted to be working, I wanted to be in what I perceived to be the real world, not a classroom. And I think that's followed me through life. But it's funny because the restaurant and hospitality industry is just an interesting place where I think you learn a lot of life lessons.
Mm.
And a couple of those are dealing with really difficult people. It's just a reality of the job. And so I think you learn, not just customer service, but you learn how to work with people who may be difficult, or maybe people who aren't like you, and that actually follows you through your career in the workplace. And the other thing that I think I really acquired a skill for was just multitasking and thriving in chaos. I mean, restaurant environments are this like there's 8 tables and all 8 of them need something different, and you're like crashing into people and running around, and I love that. Like that was just the environment that I thrived in. And it's actually not dissimilar from an early stage startup.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I did mostly digital work and digital startups in the 2000s, and then at the end of the 2000s, I started a coffee shop in Seattle because Seattle needed another coffee shop, of course. Like my little block, my little
Taking
block didn't
down
have one.
Starbucks. That's admirable.
Yeah, so we started a coffee shop up in the Central District, and I just remember the whole time setting it up, doing all the rebuild, the permitting, hiring and then work it. It just that is a level of work. Getting a coffee shop, cafe, all the different things. That is a level of work that is very different. So all the startup folks who think that they're high and mighty doing their tech startups uh, realize that the people grinding in the restaurant industry, we have a lot to learn from them. So yeah, it sounds like that
Yeah.
background has put you in pretty good positions. So then all right, let's just talk about ideation. Like, where did the idea of Indifit come from, and how did you go about sort of refining and kicking it around with friends, or kind of what's that story?
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing about this whole journey to IndieFit was it was unexpected. And I'm a pretty type A person. And so I'm somebody who generally is like, here's my 5 year plan, right? That was not how IndieFit came to be. And so, like I mentioned, very sudden, unexpected layoff due to COVID in early April. I actually did not jump straight to entrepreneurship after that. And so I think my survival instincts kicked in a little bit because I knew that at that point it was very obvious that COVID was going to be something serious in our world. And so I had the perception that I had been laid off on what was probably the earlier side of mass layoffs. And so my survival instincts kicked in and kind of told me, like, this is not time to relax and watch Netflix. This is time to go get a job, right? And so I didn't think it was the time to be making a huge change or chasing any crazy dreams. And so I more or less looked for, a job that would be a really natural extension of the food tech career that I had been building for almost 8 years at that point. And so I ended up getting introduced to the folks at Uber Eats, kind of like shotgunned through an interview process because I had literally done the exact same job twice now for different companies in the space. And ultimately, I got an offer, and it was going to be a great job. I probably would have been happy, right? And I actually accepted it. But what ended up happening is they had news of mass layoffs that were happening in the rideshare part of the company leak. And when all of that hit the media, they went into a very restrictive, no exceptions hiring freeze. And it resulted in my offer being rescinded.
Mm.
So, what basically happened in the month of April is I lost 2 jobs in 30 days. And the second one just hit different. I mean, to be totally candid, I was at a really low point. I was feeling super hopeless. I hadn't experienced anything like that in my life or career.
Mm.
And for me, fitness has always been this huge passion. Like, I'm a group fitness enthusiast, and because I was going through this really hard time and had time on my hands, I threw myself into fitness. But this was around the same time that studios and gyms are closing their doors.
Mm.
And so my previous fitness habits were sort of out the window. And I was turning to my favorite fitness instructors who had been a huge part of my life. And I was, following them on Instagram and Facebook, and seeing like, okay, they're laid off now. Like, what are they up to? How do I support them and consume their content? And I basically tuned into the fact that there was this whole crazy, like, underground surge of entrepreneurship happening in fitness. And largely what it looked like was fitness instructors just being resourceful and putting content out on social media or teaching on Zoom. And largely this was happening on Venmo. And so the use case was pretty much like, I'm going to teach a fitness class. Come if you want, maybe pay me. Here's my Venmo. And so I look at this as somebody with a technology background, and I'm like, there has to be a better way, right? And so I got really excited about this idea that I could support, an industry that had meant so much to me through my life, and really give back to, fitness instructors who I believe are these like unsung heroes who historically have very poor earning potential that does not align with the actual value that they bring to people's lives. And so I kind of just got obsessed with the idea. I mean, I think at that point, Indifit was born, and there were a lot of sleepless nights and like manic business planning in Google Docs. And of course, it went from, idea to reality in just a couple of weeks after that.
That's amazing. Yeah, and so I'm curious, as you're going through the process, you're writing everything out in Google Docs. Who did you bring in? Who did you bounce the idea off? Who were those original instructors? And then how did you go about thinking about the product and spinning that up? And I'm always curious about the like growth plan product dance, and I'm just
Yeah.
curious what that looked like for you at the beginning.
Yeah, so I worked for a couple of weeks on the idea solo. And what that looked like was really scoping out like, what is this business, right? Like, how are we going to make money? Who is the target market? And then, of course, just like you said, it was going and finding those people and talking to them. And so I wanted to get some amount of validation from my friends in the industry and get their thoughts. And it was really an open invitation in a way to like build this business with me, right? Like, tell me what you need. And so I got, a lot of fire in my belly from that exercise because the feedback that I was getting was so fantastic.
Mm.
And it just kind of like pushed me forward in my conviction that this was really something. But when it came time to translate this business plan that I've now spent, many hours crafting in a document into something real, that's where I started to have the realization around I can't do this alone, right? And so it sort of pushed me into the chapter of how do you find a team? And I initially did this wrong. And this is a learning to share with the group is I thought back on my own, network over the years, and I'm like, who would be the perfect co-founder for this business? And all of the people who came to mind were people who were gainfully employed in full-time jobs in a pandemic.
Mm.
And I started, showcasing this around to them and trying to pull them in. I now realize how sort of crazy that is. People don't walk away from secure jobs in a global pandemic to do something crazy that has no validation. So I ultimately realized, I need to be open to connecting with strangers. Like, I'm probably going to start this business with a stranger, and it's probably going to be somebody in my exact same position who was recently laid off, has a similar passion for the mission. And then it became, how do I find this person? And so what that ended up looking like was enrolling in a 6-week fellowship program that was called Chrysalis.
Mm.
And it was led by Sarah Kuntz of Clio Capital in San Francisco. And she very smartly just saw this opportunity to help the many people who had been laid off due to COVID, who perhaps might be thinking about starting companies, since innovation tends to happen in times of economic downturn.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into this free program with very low expectations. I just kind of thought it couldn't hurt. And I was so impressed with the quality of people in the program. And ultimately, I found my entire co-founding team there over Zoom in a pandemic, and we never met in person. So it is a bit of a crazy story.
That's great.
But I think for me, it actually became, it got me the team that I have today, and they're incredible. So I'm so grateful it played out that way.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'll make sure to link to that. Is that program ongoing? Or was it a kind of a one-time thing?
It was a one-time thing, but that's the question that everybody asks. And so I do think that Sarah and also Matt, someone who ran it with her, I think that they do have interest in thinking about, how do we make this a living resource, or is this repeatable? So it's worth following along with them, because I think there is a possibility that could happen in the future.
Good. All right. So you found some people with some time, and so, all right, you're talking with a bunch of instructors. How do you go about the process of, like, all right, we're going to build, and then what did the initial testing of whether you're onto something, what did that look like?
Yeah. So, as a first time founder, I at that point had not had a lot of exposure to the no code movement, or, some of these tools that exist today
Right.
that make it truly easier than ever to start a business.
Yeah.
And so I had the wrong approach to this initially, to be honest. I mean, in my mind, it was like, we need to go spend a bunch of time building a thing. Who is going to do that? And fortunately, I had very scrappy co-founders around me who had previous entrepreneurial experience and really helped me see, like, for this specific business, speed to market is everything, right? Like, we don't have to be this like world-class incredible product. We just have to be better than Venmo. Like, people are using Venmo. We can definitely be better than that. And so we embraced the idea of no code tooling, which allowed us to go from formation of the team and idea phase to public launch in 4 weeks. And that still blows my mind. This is definitely a piece of advice I love to share with other people, is the barriers to entry for a tech company are probably not as high as you think they are. There are so many tools out there. So the tool that we started with was called ShareTribe. And I will admit that ShareTribe has its limitations. We had basically hit the ceiling of what it could do for us nearly instantly when we launched, but it allowed us to launch quickly and at least get into market and start building a brand. We've since migrated onto some better technology, but I feel really glad that we just focused on launching quickly and being scrappy, because ultimately, from the time your product hits the market in any capacity, whether that's a public or private beta, your velocity of learning just speeds up so much. Like, I was not learning a whole lot about my business when I was thinking about it in docs and spreadsheets. I learned more about my business when it was in the real world.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So let's talk about this a little bit, because it's huge. A lot of people in a similar position didn't take entrepreneurship classes in school, or even if they did, it was more sort of old school, fill out a business plan, do a
totally,
like, so far removed from reality. So you have an idea, you go out and talk to a bunch of people that are going to be using it. Now, obviously this is two sides. So you need the people that are or are you thinking about this differently? Are you thinking just get the instructors, recruit the instructors, and then let them market to their own customer base? Is that your basic strategy?
So actually both, right? Because
Yeah.
this was an interesting part of our journey that I'm happy to double click into further. We started with a a business model that I would have called a marketplace. And so I think the initial issue that we were really trying to focus on was there's all of this independent fitness content being created out there, but it's disjointed. Like it lives on people's social media pages. There is no central resource that is driving discoverability of these experiences. I think we thought we could do both. Like we kind of called ourselves like a market network or a SaaS like marketplace. There's all these buzzwords for companies that kind of straddle that line. We thought we could do both. We, launched and focused on that model for about 3 months. And I think we very quickly started to realize that the marketplace aspect of the business was what was not working quite right. And so we started realizing just how expensive and hard the consumer side of building that marketplace was going to be. And if consumer acquisition for your marketplace is difficult and expensive, that cost has to go somewhere. And so we started realizing like we started realizing that we felt like we were on a path to becoming ClassPass, right? And they in today's world don't have a great relationship with their supply. Like generally studios kind of perceive ClassPass as something they have to do because consumers crave that optionality in terms of studio hopping, but they generally feel like ClassPass squeezes their margins. It's just not a super positive relationship. And so we ultimately decided like the core problem that we're obsessed with is the right problem, which is empowering independent instructors. The way we're going to do it is not what we originally thought by building a marketplace. So we pivoted to exactly what you said, which is more of like a software model where we focus exclusively on getting in front of instructors and they bring their own clients and their own demand to the platform. This is really about tooling that equips them to run their business, not necessarily exposing them to new clients.
That's good. All right. So then in the no code, so for people listening in, curious about entrepreneurship, right? As you have an idea, you're out there just talking, interviewing, doing as much as you can to learn about your market. The beautiful part about doing a bunch of interviews out there is that you're simultaneously building your business as you're learning about how to tailor your business, right? And so as you're doing this, you choose a no code solution. Let's talk just a little bit more about no code. What did you explore? What did you test? I mean, if you want to even get specific with different tools and whatnot, how
Yeah.
did your team rally around that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, because we thought about our business as a fairly cut and dry marketplace initially, Share Tribe kind of was like the obvious great solution for us because it gives you those rails of a two-sided marketplace, built-in payment, just like everything that would be complicated and time-consuming to engineer is just there, right? I think, every business looks a little bit different. For us, being web-based was totally fine. And even today, we don't have any sort of native app. We will launch a native app to help instructors manage their business, on the run in the future. But we're a very web-based product. That's not the case for everybody. And so there's other solutions out there that even help you to stand up a native app in a really scrappy way. So one of those that we did look at was a company called Glide. And their tagline is basically like build an app from a spreadsheet, which sounds crazy, but is in fact true. And today we're on a platform called Perry, which is actually also playing in that no code space, really focused on service based businesses.
Hmm.
But we actually came in as one of their first partners ever. And so for us, it was a little bit of a strategic partnership where they needed to build some things out for the first time. And so they did what was almost like a custom build for Indifit. But all of those components will now be reused as they onboard other partners in a more self service way.
Oh, that's super cool. That's great. So how's it going? Obviously, it's been quite the year, last 12 months or so for everybody. How are you and your team doing personally, and then how is that merged in with kind of the I'd imagine ups and downs of any startup?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's ups and downs. So, I think one thing that remains very true for me is all of this is worth it. it's not easy. I will never lie and create the illusion that entrepreneurship is this like rosy, fun journey. And I think it can sometimes look that way. It's like I've been doing, like, it's great to be here, doing this podcast with you. And we've had some other cool, media mentions along the way. And I think it's really easy to see those updates on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever it is and just think, like, wow, they're crushing it. They must be having so much fun and success must be falling in their lap, right? It's not the reality. I
Yeah.
mean, entrepreneurship is hard. The number of hours I'm putting in right now is effectively all of them. Um,
Right.
but like I said, it's worth it. It's high highs and low lows. Everything feels so much more personal than experiencing things like this in a traditional employment setting. And so that unfortunately does make the lows cut a little deeper, but it makes the moments where we really know that we have had an impact on one of our partners' lives and careers, or the moments where, we achieve a milestone that felt so far off when we got started, or achieve things that felt impossible. The highs are just undescribable. So it's been a fun roller coaster. In terms of where the business is at today, I mentioned that we did that little pivot in September, and so we decided, we're going to leave the marketplace model behind. Could come back in the future at some point. It's not off the table, but we are laser focused on creating business management tools for instructors and giving them full control and ownership of their clients. And so some of the, fortunately for us, that didn't actually change our product in a super material way. It more so just required little tweaks. And it did require us to spin off some net new features. So one, for example, is we realized that, plugging Indifit booking into the channels that an instructor already owns was going to be really important. So one thing that we launched was the ability to embed a little booking schedule into an instructor's website,
Oh, cool.
instead of having them need to bring their clients onto the Indifit platform. So we keep moving further and further into a direction where our technology is like truly one and the same, with the instructor's tech stack, with their website, with their social media. We're frequently the link in bio on Instagram, or they manage links and bookings and things of that nature. So we've learned a lot, and ultimately it feels really good to have, recognized an opportunity to pivot in a direction that puts us on a path to a much bigger opportunity, because we're now able to sell completely agnostic of geography. So in our previous model, we had to think, for virtual classes, you can take a virtual class from anywhere. But another big part of our business was actually outdoor and in-person classes.
Hmm.
And so that would have required us to reach like marketplace liquidity and sort of balance supply and demand on a local level in every city, which would have really slowed down the speed that we could scale at. And now as a software product, I mean, anywhere in the country you can use Indifit, and soon we'll actually add support for other currencies, which will allow anybody in the world to use Indifit. So it feels really rewarding to have recognized the bigger opportunity, and to have pivoted and actually like successfully gotten onto that path in a pretty short period of time. So now we're just full speed ahead in terms of pursuing that vision.
It's a really great pivot story. Not a lot of entrepreneurs can work their way through that kind of gauntlet. So kudos to you and your team. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So you met online. With your team, and this is a huge question in light of everybody doing remote work. Is how do you build culture? How do you build trust?
Yeah.
Right? Because trust in a team is everything. How have you and your team, if you don't mind sharing, kind of been building that, and what tools have you been using? And I'm curious what that's looked like for you all.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think it's something, it's actually even tougher when you're in an early stage startup, because I think we all feel like chickens with our head cut off and there's just so much to do that it can be really tempting to just succumb to the whirlwind of execution instead of being mindful about, taking a couple of minutes to be like, how are you? And so we've been really intentional about the meetings that we put on the calendar. And of course, they're all virtual. But I make a point to really start every meeting, even if there's something super burning and we need to dive in. I make a point to just be human with my co-founders because I recognize that all of that, like, in between time that historically happened in an office, the age old water cooler chat, that just doesn't happen as much on Zoom. Like, I think there's something about our psyche that's like, we put this on the calendar and now we're in this virtual environment to accomplish whatever the purpose of this meeting is. I think people almost feel like you got to just like dive in and get it done. But I actually would argue that like maintaining culture in a virtual environment requires you to still prioritize that time to know what they had for lunch or what they're doing this weekend or whatever that may be. So it's been a lot of like prioritizing that, putting virtual happy hours on the calendar, and just continuing to get to know each other in new ways. But the big thing there that's interesting is what you mentioned, which is trust.
Mm.
And this was something very unique on our journey because we didn't have like a pre-existing relationship and a history before Indifit. And so we had to simultaneously champion this business forward while getting to know each other and developing that initial trust. And it's tough. And if there's one thing I've learned on this, it's honest, like, brutal honesty, I would say, is so, so, so important. So there have been plenty of topics that would have been much easier for me to just hide from and just kind of like never bring certain things up and hide from them. I've tried to push myself to always do the thing that is hard, which is just like say it and say it super directly. And so there have definitely been phone calls that have happened as a team that are like calling each other out on, the way one of us conducted ourselves in a meeting, or calling each other out on accountability to, a project, whatever it may be. And it goes both ways. My team has done that for me as well. And I love that we have a culture where nobody is afraid to say things like, "Hey Cheryl, I think you're obsessing about a detail that's not important." And I actually feel glad when things like that are said because I think it's how we all hold each other accountable, and ultimately it breeds respect and trust, which is essential to a working relationship.
That's great. Yeah, no, it's super admirable the way you go about doing that. I think it requires the right personalities to be able to proactively do that sort of thing. I've had the privilege of working with a number of colleagues that are way better than me when it comes to just general communication. Right, people who are really good at their text game, really good at actually picking up the phone and calling, jumping on Zooms or whatever video conferencing quickly. And that's part of it, but I think the part that you all are the actual ability to be proactive about calling each other out, and that trust, building that trust online is super difficult. So that's
Yeah.
amazing. So with regard to your pivot then, when it comes to validation, did you have at some point like an aha moment about the validation of the pivot, or did you have some KPIs you were tracking, or like how did you think about that?
Yeah. So on a marketplace model, of course, both quality and quantity is important. Like we wanted lots of instructors, but we wanted great instructors. And I think admittedly of the two, in our early days, we obsessed a little bit more with quantity. And so the KPI that we were chasing and obsessing about was just like how many instructors are on this platform.
Mm.
And I think I very quickly learned that was a trap. And so the aha moment was actually looking at our business from the context of the value that each instructor generated rather than just counting heads. And when we did that, what we realized was about 80% of bookings that were happening on the platform were coming from 20% of instructors,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually not like, this is not unique to our business. Everybody talks about this 80/20 rule. It's like a very common phenomenon in marketplaces. I've seen it throughout my career. But it was this light bulb moment of, we're obsessing about the quantity and we're missing how important this 20% are. And that was the aha moment is we pulled a list of the instructors who were falling into that category of like really, really over indexing in terms of the number of bookings and also the price of what they were charging for class, right? Because when it comes to what instructors are selling, there's actually two inputs. There's what is your pricing and also how many people book it. And so we started really obsessing with that 20%. And what we realized that all of them had in common is they were using Indifit as a business management tool. Like they were using us like software. They were actually generating primarily their own bookings.
Mm.
And it was a lot of really loyal clients who kept coming back. And so it wasn't like a hamster wheel of people doing the one and done booking thing. It was real loyalty that was developing. And so that led to a lot of realizations, which was, maybe we've been dumping money into acquiring clients, but we really missed the point that we could be much more effective at helping instructors strengthen their relationships with the clients that they do have, and really obsessing about like retention and loyalty and life cycle marketing rather than acquisition. And so all of those thoughts sort of converged to make us realize like this is a software platform. Like we can step away from consumer marketing and hamster wheel acquisition, which unfortunately was not very sticky in our data, and we can really help people go deep and build amazing businesses. And the excitement that came with that realization was overwhelming because suddenly, I mean, I can remember the specific meeting where we all sat in a room and it was like, we're generally pretty good about not interrupting each other, but when everyone's excited about the same thing, it's just like, oh, and this and this and this and this. And that's kind of how the meeting went, was us going, oh my gosh, we could sell anywhere, right? Like there would be no geographic limitations. Like, oh my goodness, we could do, fixed monthly pricing and we'll have consistent MRR. And so there were so many, there was, to your point, one realization that led us there. But the second our brain started working that way, there was just no doubt in our mind. It was so black and white and so clear what we needed to do.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's super cool. So, I mean, it's admirable the way that you were able to really focus on the quality. I mean, the quality versus quantity trap, I just hear it all the time. And not very many people pivot out to identify and even learn about their customers enough to identify the 20%. I mean, I'm wondering actually if even your no code approach, did that help free up your ability to look at the data and really focus it on the customer, or kind of like, how did you even service the data to know about the 20% and start asking the questions down that line?
Yeah. This is a topic nobody talks about, right? And like I come from all of these big companies that have like Looker and all of these amazing like business intelligence tools that literally put data at your fingertips. And everybody preaches like be data driven, right? Like make decisions with data. The thing that nobody talks about is when you are an early stage company with a scrappy product, even getting your data
Right.
and organizing your data is this like insane task. So very fortunately for me, my co-founder Scott is a bit of an ops and analytics genius.
Awesome.
But really, in order to even derive insights like the ones that we're talking about, we're talking like manual CSV export of really ugly, disorganized data being fed into Excel with like 100 formulas to clean it up.
Right.
And none of this happens in real time. And so,
Right.
best case scenario, we're doing this dump once a week and then we're looking at it. So, this is tough. And honestly, like, I'm sure there are a lot of like great startups in this space, but like someone should start that company, right? Like that's a big pain point, is like making self-service data really easy for early stage companies. Yeah, it's not easy. And so I guess my advice on that would be, because it's not easy, it requires a really high level of like discipline and
Mm,
commitment to forcing yourself to do it anyway. Because I can tell you how tempting it is to go 2 or 3 weeks without ever doing that export, right?
mm,
And you're going to miss really
mm.
important insights about your business.
Wow. Wow, that's cool. So now, how are you thinking about your growth strategy at this point? Now you're spreading your wings a little bit. I imagine you're thinking about multiple work streams, multiple different channels, different types of creative campaigns. Well,
Yeah.
obviously, we'll put the links to all the channels that you're hitting. But I'm just curious how you, as a CEO in the early stage startup land here, are thinking about it.
Yeah. So we're actually at this really cool inflection point right now because I feel like we had sort of our like 0 to 100 playbook. And now we're starting to think about the 100 to 1000 playbook. And the first version, right, like getting our very first customers, was all about being scrappy. And so pretty much all of the instructors who we work with today have come from one of two places. They've either come from us reaching out directly on Instagram, And I always feel silly saying this, but it's like our go-to-market strategy was sliding into DMs. I
Right.
mean, we found instructors who looked like a great fit. We sent them a charming, personalized message. We got them on the phone and we like pushed them through this conversion funnel. And I'm so glad we did that because what it did was put us super close to our customers.
Mm,
And so, this first 100, we're on a text message basis with these people. I know their life stories. I mean,
mm,
some of these people are friends for life.
mm.
And I feel like that depth of relationship is so important for an early stage company because it breeds some of that same like trust and respect that we talked about that matters in a team that also matters with your customers because you're relying on these people to be your source of market validation. Like you're relying on them to give you feedback and tell you honestly if something sucks, right? And so we send surveys all the time that in parentheses say like please be brutally honest, it helps us, right? You kind of have to draw it out of people. So I feel really glad that we, didn't just try to, shoot to thousands of instructors overnight and pour money into ads. We actually did the gritty work, right? Like we did the direct sales. But that strategy is probably not going to be the most scalable or efficient thing we can do going forward. So now we're at this really cool inflection point in the business where we're imagining all of the things that are possible in terms of how we can do this in a more scalable way. And I think there's a couple things about fitness that are really unique that inform how I think about that. And I think the most important thing there is fitness is just so community based. And I had already experienced that, here in Chicago where I'm located. It's just a fairly small community. It's like instructors know other instructors, people who are, in the studio circuit working out every day know all of these people.
Right.
And so I really think about it as, how do we join that community in an authentic way? And that's not by being pushy. That's not by like throwing money at the problem and advertising to them. It's really by leading with value and content. And so I'm very bullish on, a content marketing strategy for IndieFit and sort of like building that funnel and getting instructors in the funnel at any point in their life cycle, even if they're not ready to go fully independent or they're not like actively shopping for a booking tool on Google. We just want to form a relationship with them, right? And we want to do that by offering them resources that help them grow their business, help them learn. And funny enough, on this topic, we're actually doing one of our very first webinars this afternoon and have quite a few instructors signed up to join us there. So we're excited about that. But definitely have to think about the long game in this industry, I think, versus really pushing for direct response marketing.
How often are you going to be doing these webinars? Where can I point people to?
Yeah, so I think we're going to commit to once a month, which I think will be doable. We're shopping for speakers right now, right? So any subject matter experts or anything in the fitness space, we'd love to be connected to.
Cool.
The woman who's joining us today is named Christy Evanson, and she's a branding consultant and graphic designer whose niche is fitness. So she specifically helps fitness instructors design their websites and define their brands. So yeah, more to come, but we're www.indifit.co, no M on the end. And we announce all of these things in our blog and on our email list and whatnot.
And will those videos be recorded so people could check them out later?
They will. Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'd love to switch gears a little bit in the gambit of early stage startup life. As an early stage CEO, the topic of fundraising.
Oh boy. Does everybody give you that reaction?
Yes, it's painful, and the balance between growing your business and talking to investors and figuring out, once you believe in something, you want to get investors on board. But what has that process been like for you in the way, even earlier in this conversation, you've been sort of brilliantly teaching the fellow entrepreneurs what you've been learning. I'm curious for your own journey, what has that been like, and maybe share some learnings along the way would be amazing.
Yeah. Fundraising is just one of those funny things. It's like you got to do it. Nobody really enjoys it, but I will say it's a fantastic learning experience.
Mm,
As much as our several month long fundraising journey at this point has been a source of stress and frustration, I also think that my story has become so crystallized through that process.
Mm.
And every step of the way, I've received great feedback, and I've been challenged to think bigger and think about things like unit economics, right? Like certain things that investors are going to push on. So for a bit of background in terms of where we're at in our fundraising journey, we did a friends and family round in September. So we took $120,000 in at that point, and now we're in the middle of a proper pre-seed. So we're raising 700,000, and we have about half of that committed at this point. So it's been a journey. I think a couple of things I've learned is thinking about when to start is a tricky thing. And I found that I actually couldn't really get great advice on that when I was initially trying to decide, like, am I ready to get out there and start raising capital, or should I wait? And now that I've done it, I realize why that's such a difficult question to answer and give feedback on. Because the answer is basically like, it depends, right? And so I think I look back, and in many ways, I feel like I started actively fundraising too early. And part of the reason I say that is it kind of depends who you're taking capital from. Like angels can back anything they believe deeply in. When it comes to true VC money, venture capital money is not for figuring things out. It's for scaling things that work.
Right.
And so I think that I got out there at a point where a lot of things in our business were still being figured out. And I think I overexposed that. And so in pitches, I think I was perhaps being too honest about saying, like, yeah, we're still thinking about this, right? And here's how we think about it. And I probably showed investors that, like, my frame of thinking is solid, right? But I also exposed the fact that there's 10 things changing in this business, and there isn't a proven playbook on certain things yet. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I started too soon. And that probably led to quite a bit of inefficiency, in the sense that I took a lot of meetings that I was just like not ready to close that deal. But the flip side of that argument is, in many ways, I'm glad I started that early, because it sped up my learning. And I think it just made us better. And it allowed me to start synthesizing the type of feedback that you get from investors at a much earlier part of our journey. So I guess I unfortunately don't have a lot of magic advice about that, but it is just a tricky topic in terms of, like, when do you start? In terms of what that looks like today, like I said, we have half of the round committed. So now I'm feeling really great about the way the story is hitting. And this is like months of feedback that has now come from about 65 pitches, right? So this thing is very polished. It's been widely adapted over the last couple of months. Now the topic that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about is how to drive urgency. And so now we're getting to, like, the home stretch, right? It's time to start thinking about when to close and how we, herd all those cats to get over the finish line. And that's also not easy, but I have learned in a very big way how important driving urgency is. Like, none of this can just be open-ended. None of this can be like, yeah, here's what we're raising, we'll close when we have it. You have to do the Jedi mind tricks that convince people that there's actually a sense of scarcity here, and that if they don't move quickly, they may not have the opportunity to invest at all.
Right. Yeah, I mean, navigating the gauntlet of the startup in angel investors and the VC community, it's tricky, and there are a lot of traps, because a lot of the VCs with money, with budgets to do things like marketing, are the ones who create all the content that then are attracting all of the founders. And then often they're just stringing a lot of founders on. In fact, most VCs I know actually tout how many no's they say, right? They're just like, we only accept 1%. So that it feels like there's some injustice going on there, because a lot of the big VCs are taking meetings with everybody. It's strategic for them to do it, because they're meeting everybody. They are paid to have access and community and deal flow. And maybe to some degree, it is helpful for the founders, because there's some value exchange. You are refining your pitch. You're learning a little bit. But there are more creative ways to go about landing strategic money and building your asset up so that you can have the right ask at the right time. And it sounds like you've been learning that lesson by fire here over the last few months or number of months.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point there, which is like, when you go out and you start, and by the way, that's a really important part of fundraising, is like doing the work that happens before you actually get out there and pitch, like really building a strong structure for your pipeline. And it's like that quote that's like, if you gave me 5 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first three sharpening the axe, right? It's like you seriously have to like, and I promise this matters, because your efficiency that you can actually do outreach and like schedule meetings at goes way up if you did all of your research at the beginning. And so we started this process with a spreadsheet with 500 investors in it. And that was super painful and time consuming, but I have never had to go back to that list. Like I've left all of that research at the starting line, and it's allowed me to just really like move quickly and keep going. So I think that that personal organization process at the beginning of the journey matters a ton. But I also think it's being strategic, because your point there was like, these VCs that are super visible, they're putting out all of these content and they're a magnet for founders. They are actually your lowest probability of a check.
Especially,
and a lot of people spend all of their time chasing those people and then feeling super discouraged.
Right.
And so I think one thing that we learned was, and I think like, as you like, for founders who are at the beginning of a fundraising journey, like I promise it gets better. Like I am actually in a much better place mentally today than I was 3 months ago at the beginning of my raise, because you genuinely get this, like, it's like a founder's sixth sense. Like you start to be able to predict where, like, I can tell now within like 60 seconds of a meeting how it's going to go. And so you really develop this sixth sense for like who really cares about your business.
Yeah.
And some really great advice that I got from Tony Wilkins, who's an angel here in Chicago, was it is not a founder's job to evangelize their business. And what he meant by that was like, it is not your job to go and convince somebody who doesn't care to care. It's your job to find the people who do care. And so I think that's been a big light bulb in our journey, is the realization of like, what does that investor who cares actually look like, and how do I find them? And for us, in nearly every case, the investors who have actually come in and committed at this stage of the journey have come from personal introductions. And I know as an early founder, that's like the most annoying thing in the world to hear, because you're like, great, how do I get those? Right? Like they're not falling out of the sky.
Right.
But everybody feels that way. Like that's the secret that a lot of people don't realize. I think everybody thinks they're alone and thinking like everybody else has this amazing network, but I don't. Everybody feels like they don't have the network. And so it's really just about starting that flywheel somewhere. And for me, that flywheel actually started with a lot of founder friendships. Like start with founders. I know that's counterintuitive, but before you go straight to VCs, go to people who have done it, who are a little bit further ahead, who have taken on capital from the type of people who you think would write you a check, and make them your advocate. So the largest commit that we have so far in our pre-seed raise came from another founder. And I genuinely would never have found this firm, because they are not the type of investor you were describing, who has like big flashy website, robust content strategy. They are very stealthy and very discreet. But because, you know, somebody who knew both of us was able to connect the dots in terms of why he would love our business, we got connected. So it's really the networking game. Fortunately for me, I really enjoy that. Like I'm having tons of fun spending all of my days getting to know people and talking about Indifit, which is genuinely my favorite thing to do. So I recognize for some founders that can be a little more painful, but it's been quite an enjoyable task for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. A very important lesson there. In the same way that you laser beamed on your instructors to improve the quality and really maniacally focus on their experience, it's the same thing on fundraising. It's understanding who your target customer is, right? And it's a customer. The angels and the VCs that you're going after, you have to. It sounds like you've done the work to try to figure out. And I think the advice that you received was absolutely spot on. And so that's fantastic.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. And I remember at the beginning of my fundraising journey, I heard this stat that was, you should expect to have between 50 and 100 meetings or more to close a round. And I went, no way, absolutely not. I'm like, it's not going to take me. That sounds crazy. like I said, I'm approaching the 70s in
Yeah.
terms of how many pitches I've done.
Yep.
And I now recognize that that is part of the process. That does not mean that I'm a bad founder. That does not mean I have a bad business. That is just, this is the sales funnel. Like, sorry guys, this is the reality. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And like you said, that the main reason that that is so challenging is because this could be a demanding full-time job in and of itself. This happens to be a full-time job that exists on top of running your business.
Right.
So that I don't have a great solution for. I mean, I drop balls all the time because
Right.
I'm juggling right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you just have to prioritize the fundraising stuff, because if that capital is not there, you don't get to do anything else, right? If you don't have the capital you need to do it.
So this has been a very insightful conversation. Thanks. Your journey is amazing, and thanks for being willing to share some wisdom along the way. Any last words for the founders, investors listening in that you feel like that you want to share?
Oh gosh. Well, you're not alone. It's
Mhm.
not an easy journey. I value my friendships with other founders so much along
Mm.
this journey. From a mental health perspective, from a advice standpoint. So I am always happy to be that resource to others where I can be. So more than happy to connect or chat with anybody who's listening and feels like they could, use a
Mm.
friend on this crazy journey. And the other piece of advice I always like to give, and this isn't necessarily for founders, this is for people who are thinking about starting a company.
Mm.
I reflect on the last year of my life, and I know that I wouldn't be here talking to you about a business that I started if COVID didn't happen.
Mm.
And that's unfortunate. Like, I wish I had done this a long time ago. And so now I have this 2020 hindsight in terms of, like, if you want to do this, you just got to do it. And I think I would have continued to put obstacles in my own way. So even though I did have this like vague goal of starting a company someday, I was an expert at creating excuses not to do it. Whether it was like, oh, I just don't have enough saved up yet, or I'm just not smart enough yet. I just don't have the idea. I just don't know who I would do it with. Ultimately, all of these things are excuses. Nobody has perfect preparation when they go on this journey. And I certainly did not. Like, this started with a layoff. I was not saving for like 5 years in preparation of going on this journey. You really just do it and you figure the rest out. And that spans like all aspects of life, right? Like, I had to cut my personal financial burn rate a lot to
Mm.
do this. But
Mm.
you just figure it out.
Yep.
It's like every step of the way I've made sacrifices and I've made changes, but suddenly I'm not unhappy to be making any of them, because all of these things are in service of something that I love doing. So I love being a cheerleader for entrepreneurship. If you're even considering it, if you think it's something you'd like to do, go for it. That has to be my parting wisdom.
What is the best way for people to find you online and follow along with Indifit?
Yeah. So I recently started a personal website. It
Mm.
was my holiday project, and it stemmed from the fact that so many people have given me the advice over the last year to write.
Mm.
And so, especially founders who are further ahead than me, it's like you're living through what is a very special part of your life.
Yes.
Write it down and don't forget about it. So I launched a website to do just that.
Awesome.
I haven't put up a ton of content yet, but it's cheryl-kemp.com.
Cool.
And all of my other contact information, social, is there. So feel free to check me out there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you for your time. All the best to you and your company. And the way that you're instructing, the way you're sharing the story, I'm glad that you're writing, because I'm excited to share your articles with founders, because not every founder does the best job explaining and teaching. And it's very clear you have a natural teaching gift. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This was fun, Will. Thanks.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number 2, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.